technical processes, right? That isn't everywhere, right? And if you don't have federal funding to help initiate basic science research, right? All of the applied science, then all of the marketing that leads to stuff that we can use that is useful does not happen, because you need to figure out the science first. And what we just saw right there, right? Just think about that. We really, like, Elon, you really want to cut that? Seriously? That's the kind of thinking that we don't want to incentivize in this country? That's the vision you have. Okay, I understand elections have consequences, but I'm damn well going to fight for science and fight for reason and reason-backed policy. And thank you, Greta, for that amazing presentation, and Jake and everybody else today. And, you know, it's always, when I introduced somebody earlier, I spoke about going from something really specific to something really broad. And when I went from doing work on geoengineering to this program, which is like the broadest thing in terms of climate, touching on everything, wow, was that challenging. And you know, being able to host an event like this, or help host an event like this, where we have people coming at it from so many different perspectives, where we can go deep into science like that, and now watch a documentary about a topic as important as carbon dioxide removal, which we've emitted a lot of carbon. We've gone from 280 to 420 ppm. We're already too high in terms of carbon. We can't immediately stop emitting. So most likely to avoid some of the worst consequences of climate change, we're going to have to remove carbon, and some of that is going to have to be put in terrestrial ecosystems, marine ecosystems, all sorts of places. So Luke Aronson's project, Chasing Carbon, is a documentary about that. Carbon capture and storage that we'll be doing in the future. Luke, the floor is yours.
Right. Hello, everyone. Long day, so thank you for sticking around. Let's see here. Oop. Oh. I accidentally clicked something. Jada. Very sensitive touchpad. Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. So I made a movie about the different methods and the viability of carbon capture as a method of climate change mitigation. So first off, I would like to thank my capstone committee. We've got Dr. Corey Gabriel, the director of this program, as well as Dr. Ralph Keeling, the director of the Scripps CO2 program. Also David Mitchell, the CEO of Crops Carbon International, and Aaron O'Rulian, the director of the Film and Television Department at the Orange County School of the Arts. Missed a slide there. This is a different version of the presentation. So either way, before I hit play here, I just wanted to say that this is actually just a small portion of a much longer video. I'm actually going to be creating a feature-length documentary because I ended up capturing so much footage that I couldn't include it all in this 15-minute window. I'm very passionate about science communication and education and outreach to the public. So there are times in the video where I will be engaging in some satirical language or being a bit hyperbolic. So just keep that in mind. This isn't purely about the science. So without further ado, this is Chasing Carbon.
Carbon reduction technology.
Direct air capture.
Carbon capture industry.
How does carbon capture actually work?
Sucking carbon dioxide out of the sky.
Carbon removal industry.
Carbon capture storage.
Carbon capture is all the rage, but does it work?
Well, now that's the big question, isn't it? Is carbon capture actually going to work? Well, that's a complicated question to answer because when most people talk about carbon capture and its various methods and its potential to mitigate climate change, there seems to be a lot of misconceptions and just a general lack of public understanding about what it can actually do. So that's why I'm here. My name's Luke. I'm a marine biologist and climate scientist, and this is chasing carbon. So at this point, basically everyone knows that climate change exists, and not only that, humans burning fossil fuels is what's causing it, like what's going on behind me at this natural gas power plant. Despite this, the fossil fuel industry and their powerful allies have engaged in a rigorous disinformation campaign to sow public doubt about climate change and the cause of it. However, behind closed doors, the fossil fuel industry and its many allies in government have all acknowledged that climate change is real and that burning fossil fuels is the cause. As Scientific American reports, Exxon knew about climate change as early as back in the 70s? Dude, really? Y'all have known since the 70s? You didn't tell us? We could have done something about it back then. Maybe if we had done something, we wouldn't have to do all this carbon capture stuff now. Maybe our coral reefs would still be alive, and we wouldn't have such massive hurricanes that Florida goes underwater once a year. Actually, I'm not as mad about that part. Florida can be underwater. And it's sunny again. It's really hot and bright out here. Thanks, climate change. So how did we go from a reasonably chill climate to this?
It is as bad as the experts feared.
155 miles per hour winds, 18-foot waves.
I can't hear anything and I can't see anything.
It looks like a bomb went off.
There was walls and walls of flames.
It is like driving through hell itself down here.
So during the Industrial Revolution, we discovered massive reservoirs of hydrocarbons in the form of oil and gas and natural gas, all that kind of stuff. Either way, we found that when you burn it, it's a really great power source. However, it also produces a lot of carbon dioxide. So basically, we took carbon that was in the ground, burned it, and now it's in the air. So now we need to get it out of the air and put it back in the ground where we found it. How do we do that? That's where carbon capture comes in. So if we've been burning fossil fuels since the Industrial Revolution, that's got to be a lot of carbon dioxide that's accumulated in the air. How do we know how much is up there? How do we know how much carbon capture should supposedly take out? Well, thankfully we have a record of all of that. So back in the late 50s, a man named Charles Keeling decided to keep track of exactly how much carbon dioxide we were actually putting up into the atmosphere. And he plotted all of that data on a big graph that we now call the Keeling curve, which looks like this. Now, sadly, Charles is no longer with us. But, lucky for me, his son kept up his work, so I went and spoke with Ralph Keeling, the current director of the Scripps CO2 program.
Hi, I'm Ralph Keeling. We're here at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I've continued measurements of atmospheric carbon dioxide that were started by my father. I'm standing in front of his Keeling curve. It shows rising carbon dioxide, this black thing going up and up and up and up. He took it to about 2005, and we've continued it since then. And you can see this beautiful up and down. That's the breathing in and out of carbon dioxide by plants in the northern hemisphere. They suck it out of the atmosphere in the summer, and they breathe it back in the fall and winter. And superimposed on that is this year-on-year rise, which is driven almost entirely by the burning of fossil fuels. So we're adding CO2 to the atmosphere by burning fuels. We're just dumping our waste into the atmosphere. It's piling up year on year. So this curve is a problem. It's a problem because CO2 levels are higher than they've been at any point in the record, but actually we know from various ways to reconstruct CO2 in the distant past that this is probably higher than any level it's been in millions of years. So back to the early days of Homo sapiens. Our ancestors have never breathed in air that had this level of CO2 in it. But not only is it higher than ever, it's also going up faster than ever. So we're in a bad place, and we're going the wrong direction faster than ever. Why? Because we're burning fossil fuel faster than ever. So what do we want to see happen? We want to see this curve start to bend. It's been bending up, it's going up, it's bending faster and faster. That just can't go on. Something's going to break. So we've got to get the system to bend over and ideally start coming down again, because it's only at that point that you start stabilizing climate. So what does it take to do that? Well, going over to renewables.
So we know what the problem is, and we know how to fix it. Why haven't we tried? Well, we have, or more realistically, we've tried to try. Back in 2015, 221 countries promised to lower their carbon emissions by signing the Paris Climate Agreement. However, 10 years later, Not a single one of those countries has actually met their original goals. And that's why carbon capture is so important. While we slowly phase out fossil fuels in our electricity generation systems, and we wait for technology to catch up in order to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors, we have to do something about all these emissions that these sectors continue to put out. Trust me, as an environmentalist, I would love to just do away with all fossil fuels right now, but it's just not possible, and we have to be realistic about this. And that doesn't mean that carbon capture is an excuse to keep burning fossil fuels. So when most people talk about carbon capture, they're talking about one of two categories, either point source capture or direct air capture. Point source capture deals with future emissions by putting a filter over the top of smokestacks, so when power plants are generating emissions, it captures some of that carbon. Granted, a lot of times, this is just an excuse for the fossil fuel companies to keep burning as much fossil fuels as possible and keep making as much money as possible. Therefore, I'm not really going to touch on point source capture as much and focus more on direct air capture. In the realm of direct air capture, there's two types of methods. There's technology-based and nature-based. I'll get to the nature-based in a little bit, but under technology-based, there's active and passive direct air capture. Active direct air capture is exactly what it sounds like. It actively has to suck in air to remove the carbon dioxide. On the other hand, passive direct air capture just exposes the capture material to the ambient air and waits for it to fill up with carbon dioxide. Now, both passive and active direct air capture use one of two materials to actually capture the CO2, usually either liquid amines or solid sorbent materials. Solid sorbent materials work by making the carbon dioxide chemically stick to the outside of the material. That's called adsorption. Not absorption with a B, adsorption with a D. The difference is, imagine you're going to pick up your friend in your car. With absorption, they get in the car. With adsorption, they just sit on the roof. Obviously, if they're sitting on the roof, they'll fall off easier, but in terms of carbon capture, that's the point. You want that CO2 to stick to the material, and then after applying either heat or moisture, that CO2 pops off again, and then you can go either utilize it or sequester it. The actual creation of these direct air capture devices and the adsorbent materials that they use requires a lot of chemistry and a lot of mechanical engineering, and I'm neither a chemist nor a mechanical engineer, so I put on the only tie that I own and did something that I thought I would never do, and traveled to Phoenix, Arizona. So to learn more about carbon capture and trucks with modified exhausts, I traveled out here to ASU to visit the Center for Negative Carbon Emissions. The Center for Negative Carbon Emissions is at the cutting edge of research on developing new adsorbent materials and devices for direct air capture. They're not just working on the technology side. The Center for Negative Carbon Emissions is also working on the legislative and economic side of carbon capture.
My name is Matt Green. I'm the director of the Center for Negative Carbon Emissions. The center is looking holistically at the carbon management problem, focusing on everything from sorbent development. So we're synthesizing and testing brand new materials at the milligram scale and looking at how we can structure those into air contactor systems, and also building carbon capture systems around specific sorbents and seeing how that integrates with carbon utilization or carbon storage mechanisms. But beyond that, the center is also looking into certification legislation that incentivizes the scale-up and deployment of carbon capture technologies, measurement, reporting, and verification frameworks, and the whole business. From a legislative standpoint, we'd like to frame carbon capture as a waste management solution, and that really changes fundamentally, the arguments of who should pay, what liability looks like, and it simplifies things quite a bit. So that's one component of the work that we're doing. On the verification and standardization of certification, that's different as well, right? So when you look at certification mechanisms and schemes, there's something like 20 different certification mechanisms out there. And so we'd like to standardize that. And so one pathway that we've been supportive of and pioneering is the so-called carbon take-back obligation, where you mandate that if you extract a pound of carbon from the ground, that you're responsible for putting away a pound of carbon durably, reliably back in the ground. And that allows the markets to kind of consume that cost.
So what actually makes a good carbon capture solution? Well, I've come up with a list of criteria based on scientific research and industry standards. The first of which is the actual capture and sequestration capacity. In order to actually make a difference, we need the carbon capture industry's capture potential to reach a gigaton annually. That's 1 billion tons of carbon. And while I know that seems like a lot, there are certainly methods that can achieve this. The second most important criteria is the actual length of storage. Storage time needs to be in the thousands of years. The third most important criteria is the cost. In order for carbon capture to monetarily even be worth doing, we need to be able to capture and store the carbon at around $100 per ton. And this might seem crazy considering most of the major players in the carbon capture industry are operating at a cost of about $600 to $800 per ton. And there are groups out there that are operating at $100 per ton or less. Granted, they're just not getting the publicity like some of these massive facilities. Then there's other criteria such as the time frame to actually scale to a gigaton capture capacity, capacity to scale on a global level, and efficiency, of course, which might seem obvious, but yeah, you can't be releasing a bunch of carbon to only be capturing a little bit more. So after a few days of absolutely roasting in the Arizona heat and learning about direct air capture, I headed back to California to talk about nature-based solutions and to cool off a bit. Another highly efficient method of carbon capture and sequestration is the restoration of seagrass meadows, such as the one I'm standing in right now. In fact, they are far more efficient at capturing carbon than any terrestrial ecosystem, making them one of the most efficient carbon sinks on the planet. Don't mind me just hanging out in the bay. Just like terrestrial plants, seagrass absorbs carbon dioxide as it grows and incorporates it into its tissue as organic carbon. When a part of the seagrass dies, it sinks into the low oxygen sediment below the seagrasses. This low oxygen environment slows the decomposition of this dead plant matter, thus preserving the carbon that was trapped in the tissue. Over time, carbon-rich sediments build up beneath these seagrass meadows, ensuring long-term carbon sequestration. Seagrass meadows around the world can sequester 4 to 8 gigatons of carbon, with some estimates being as high as 20 gigatons. Restoring seagrass meadows around the world has the capacity to sequester massive amounts of carbon. It can do so very quickly. Research has shown that from seedling to full-grown seagrass, it only takes about 12 years before a newly planted seagrass meadow is capturing carbon at the same rate as a naturally existing seagrass meadow. Compare this to, say, afforestation, where it takes 60 years of tree growth before a forest is reaching its full gigaton capture capacity. Wondering if there's anything else I can say while I'm in here. Seagrass meadows also serve as nurseries for many young fish, boosting local fish and shellfish populations, thus benefiting local fisheries. Considering many current restoration projects utilize volunteer workers to plant these seagrass beds, this proves a relatively low-cost way to boost carbon storage, but also provide real economic value to local coastal communities. And then there's the crop system. The crop system works by taking agricultural crop waste and sinking it to the bottom of the ocean. Think about a field of corn. As it grows, that's a lot of carbon captured. Normally after the harvest, the farmer will just burn the rest of the field. So the crop system steps in and says, hey, wait, don't burn it. We'll take it, bale it up into burlap sacks, and drop it thousands of meters to the sea floor. Down on the sea floor, there's little to no oxygen. Organisms down there can't digest cellulose, so it just sits there. There's been a bale of corn sitting in the Monterey Bay Canyon for the last 15 to 20 years, and it's stayed completely inert and has not decomposed. Eventually gets covered in sediment and goes back into the earth. Remember, that's how fossil fuels were made in the first place. It was just organic matter sitting on the seafloor that got covered in sand, went into the earth, and over thousands of years with tons of heat and pressure got mushed into hydrocarbons like oil and gas. I don't know, I don't work here, I think it's over there. I just look too official in this suit. People be asking me questions. So the crop system simply speeds up that process. It's taking advantage of the Earth's natural carbon cycle and exporting organic carbon to the seafloor. They have effectively found a way to take what we took out of the ground and put into the air and get it out of the air and put it right back where it started. This system can be scaled up extremely quickly and scaled to a global level. Once that happens, it can sequester around 3 gigatons a year, which is an extremely high sequestration potential. Not only that, but the sequestration is near permanent. The whole process is relatively cheap and can be done at around $100 per ton of carbon. Not only that, but it doesn't require any new technology, and all of the jobs related to the process are low skill. All right, so I know that was a bit of an abrupt ending. But like I said, this is just a small part of a much longer documentary. If you guys would like to see the rest of the documentary and learn more about the economics of carbon capture, learn about a lot more methods, learn about carbon utilization, I went and spoke to several companies that do algae cultivation and even sell to companies like Nike, and learn about afforestation, reforestation, and see me get chased by golf course security. I will be uploading my
Carbon reduction technology.
I will be uploading my full documentary to my YouTube channel in the next couple of weeks. I'm now realizing that I should have made a QR code, but there's the name of my YouTube channel. So I would like to thank everyone that I interviewed at ASU and Scripps Institute. I would like to thank my funding sources, the Julia Brown Fund and Scripps Institute of Oceanography. Of course, Jada and Corey, thank you guys so much. Everyone who helped me with logistics. My 2 friends who I tricked into being cameramen, Connor and Amadeo. My friends and family and my mom. I would not have been able to do any of this without your continuous and immense support. So thank you all very much. Oh. And one final thing, yeah, there is a film fest tomorrow at 4 o'clock. I'm screening the same version. I haven't finished the full feature-length version yet, but there's going to be a lot of good films there tomorrow. So yeah, please come by. Thank you very much.
Hi. Great video. You mentioned that some of that there were companies out there that had cheaper carbon sequestration programs at about $100 a ton, but they weren't getting much publicity. Do you feel like the more expensive ones are kind of stealing publicity intentionally? Is there more to that story, or is there another reason why they haven't really kind of broken through into the media?
Yeah, so a lot of those bigger facilities, they use a lot of flashy technology. They've got the big facilities like the ones in Iceland, there's one in Canada, but not only that, those are the ones being funded by the fossil fuel companies. So those are the methods that are actually being pushed, because obviously the fossil fuel companies want to be like, wow, look at this, we're doing so good, aren't we? But all of those big facilities have all failed to meet their original capture goals. But the companies don't care. They got their carbon credits. They avoided the emissions regulations. So yeah, that's kind of one of the reasons I made this video, is to bring awareness and publicity to some of the smaller projects that some operate at far cheaper costs and some have larger sequestration capacities. Thank you.